strong, to grow, to thrive in these small communities. We can do that. We can actually take the lead in that in the church thriving in this country. So again, thanks for being here. Talk to your buddies. Talk this up. We're a little bigger than last year, but like more than half of you are here for the first time. So I don't know what happened to those guys who came last year. We got a better speaker this year, right? Bob, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We'll see how our lesson session. All right.
If I were going to tell you the one thing that I so desperately do this work for, it would be this last one. How do we develop and equip next generation leaders? And there are a lot of things that we're going to look at, we're going to talk about during this session and go through, but certainly the focus of this is how do we do this? How do we do this task? I'm going to mention another couple of books to you during this time. This one, primarily of which, is Eric Geiger and Kevin Peck's book called Designed to Lead. And the premise of this book is really that God designed the church to train and develop leaders. Leaders in the home, leaders in the world, leaders in the church. And as I've already mentioned today, this idea of where else would we want people to learn how to lead? I mean, do we want them to learn how to be a leader in their home from the world or somewhere else? I mean, shouldn't the church be the place where people learn how to be leaders? Now, they have three specific components. One is conviction, one is culture, and the other is construct. Their idea is that the church has to have this conviction. If it's ever going to do this, it has to be convicted of the fact that we are designed to develop and prepare people to be leaders. And then we create the culture in which that development is taking place. And then we put in place the constructs, the systems, the programs, the processes by which all of that occurs. Now, I want us to spend some time kind of focused on this centerpiece. You know, culture is one of those interesting things. My advanced degree is in really intercultural studies. But the thing about culture that's fascinated me, as I mentioned earlier, that I've traveled all over the world, and I've seen a lot of different cultures. I can tell you the culture in the U.S. is far different than the culture in Cambodia. The culture in Nepal is different than the culture in Guatemala. I mean, wherever you go in the world, the culture is going to be different. But the interesting thing is that even within this country, cultures are different. I mean, aren't they? I mean, I've lived in Louisiana. And the culture in Louisiana is far different than the culture in Minnesota. I can promise you that. In fact, the culture in North Louisiana is different than the culture in South Louisiana. I don't even understand the language they speak in South Louisiana. I mean, French Creole, they're like, it's English. I'm like, no, not any English I've ever heard. It's just not. It's different. Culture in California is different than the culture in Virginia. I mean, no matter where you go, culture is different. Sometimes within the same community, on one side of town or the other, you're going to have different cultures. The same is true in the church. I mean, the culture within the church here at Albert Lea is going to be different than the culture in Sioux Falls or some other place. It's just the way it works. Now, in their book, they talk about this idea that there are two types of culture, a healthy culture and unhealthy culture. I want to insert this piece here just real quick. During the pandemic, Mac Lake produced a book called The Multiplication Effect. And he makes two statements. This first one, we will never create movement, speaking of movement in the church, unless we develop a culture in which leadership development is normative. Think about that. Because he goes on to say, if we don't build a culture of leadership development today, we will have a deficiency of leaders in the pipeline tomorrow. And we are living in that space. We have a deficiency in the pipeline of leaders for today because in the past, they did not make leadership development a normal part of the culture within the church. And so that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to create the kind of culture in which leadership development is something that normally happens. And as I mentioned, there are two types of culture. There's a healthy culture and an unhealthy culture. And so they developed this pyramid that at the base of the pyramid, you have what's called actual beliefs and values. All of us, every congregation, has what they would consider to be actual beliefs and values. The second tier of this pyramid is articulated beliefs and values. Now, I want you to listen closely to what I'm about to say because it's sometimes confusing for me. We will always articulate our actual beliefs and values, but not everything we articulate is our actual beliefs and values. Now, here's what I mean by that. Yeah, you're laughing because that was confusing, wasn't it?
No, I'm laughing because you had my attention.
Okay, good. So here's the thing. I tell people all across the country about the situation in the church, the crisis of leadership in the church as we started out this morning. I tell people about how that we have about 65% of congregations with no elders, and half of the remaining 35% only have 2. And the condition is not improving. And I haven't met anybody yet that says, you're right, we need to do something about that. But how do I know, even though they articulate that there needs to be this culture of leadership development within the church, how do I know it's not a part of their actual beliefs and values, even though they articulate? No action. You see, there are artifacts at the pinnacle of this pyramid which are the very evidences, if you will, of our actual beliefs and values. And even though we may articulate it, if we're not doing anything about it, if we're not taking action to make changes about it, it's just words. Even though we articulate it, it doesn't mean anything. It's not a part of our actual beliefs and values. How many of you in your congregations have something kind of like a ladies' day? I'm not talking about men. I'm getting around with men. But I mean, do your ladies have a ladies' day type thing? Or a ladies' Bible class? I worked with a congregation one time. I don't remember who it was. But it was one of those things. I was having them describe to me all the stuff that they currently do. They said, oh, we have a ladies' day, we have a ladies' Bible class, and we have all this spiritual stuff. And I said, do you men not do anything? Oh, yeah. They said, we have a men's breakfast, we have a men's barbecue, we have a men's fish fry. I said, you guys just eat? Pretty much. But the thing is, those artifacts, the things that are seen, articulate the values and the belief system of the congregation, whether that's a ladies' day, or it's an Iron Men, or a Mighty Men, or Beside Still Waters, or whatever it is. Those are the evidences of our actual beliefs and values, because that's what we practice. And so if we want leadership development to be a critical component of that, then we're going to have to start doing something. We're going to have to take action to implement the types of things that will create this culture within our congregation. And I'll just tell you, it's not going to be easy. Now, in this material by Mac Lake, he makes this statement, and this is kind of foundational what we're going to look at. But programs don't develop leaders. Leaders develop leaders. Leadership development is not a class you take. It's an intentional relationship you build. The things I've learned about leadership are not because I sat in a classroom and had somebody instruct me in leadership. The things I've learned about leadership came from the relationships of people who have helped me understand how to lead in specific situations, whether that's our home, in the church, on the job. I mean, it were things that I learned from people who mentored me and in those relationships. And one of those lessons that I have never forgotten is you take care of the people under you and they will take care of you. And that's a powerfully true statement. So as we think about this idea, I mentioned Tim Elmore earlier today, and just recently got an article from him called Leading Generation Z, Don't Think What, Think Why. I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek or not, but Simon Sinek has done a ton of material, one of which is a book he wrote called Start With Why. And he talks about what he calls a golden circle. And the outer ring of that circle involves organizations that know what they do. The middle ring is organizations that know not only what to do, they know how to do it. But that inner core piece that makes an organization great is they know why they do what they do. And I found it interesting that Elmore, in this particular article, talks about that if you're going to develop, you're going to equip, and you're going to work with Generation Z and preparing them to be leaders, you're going to have to begin with why. And he explains that if you do so, it will improve commitment and engagement. You remember earlier we talked about that if you're going to have commitment, connection comes before commitment, and equipping comes before engagement. Well, he says if you'll start with why, if you'll explain to people why, it will improve their commitment and their engagement. Now, here's the way I illustrate this. As much as I don't think we like it, this generation that's coming up is asking why. I mean, I don't know if your congregation meets on Sunday night, Wednesday night. I don't know the times that you meet. But before the pandemic, the question that I kept hearing from the younger generation is, why are we coming back on Sunday night to do the exact same thing we did on Sunday morning? Now, you try to explain that. Why do you do that? Because if you say, well, we're coming back to worship God, we should always want to worship God. I'm like, well, we've already done that this morning. Do we need to do it again tonight? And you say, well, it's because we're trying to edify and build up one another. And I'm like, then why are we coming back to worship? It doesn't make sense. I mean, there's no ending to that circle in that argument. But they're asking why. They want to know, why are we doing these things? And why do we do them in this order? Why do we have two songs of prayer, a song, the Lord's Supper, a song, a sermon, an invitation, another song, and then do announcements and have a closing prayer? I mean, does our service really begin and end? I mean, does God classify worship with a beginning and ending point? But that's what we do. And we even create different rules outside of that time frame. That there are things that we can do outside the assembly that we can't do inside the assembly. And I'm like, our younger generation is, why is that? And we haven't provided good answers. But if we want them to be engaged and committed, we're going to have to be able to provide the answer to why. Number two, it fosters better decision making. You know, when people know why they're doing what they do, they're going to make better decisions because there's a purpose for that. And I can't tell you how important that purpose is, that why that people need to know. Number three, it's going to increase ownership. You want them to take ownership, explain to them why they're being asked to do what they do. Number four, it's going to deepen creativity. I love this one. I'm telling you, our younger generation, they are so creative. It's beyond me. I don't have that gene. I mean, whatever that is in the genetic code of left brain, right brain, creativity, I didn't get that. Don't know why I didn't get it, but I didn't get it. I mean, people say, hey, man, could you draw this? I'm like, no. I'm not graphically oriented. And they'll send me stuff, and they'll say, what do you think about this? And I'm like, you don't want to know. I mean, because what looks good to me may not be graphically what's going to be good for what you're trying to do. So people stop sending me that stuff because I'm not creative. But there are people, especially our younger generation, man, they are creative. And if we can give them a why, it will deepen that creativity. But here's the biggest one. It will empower them to do better problem solving. They can solve problems when they know there's a reason why they're doing so. And we need to empower them to do it. We may not always like the answer, but if we will empower them to do so, we're going to get them ready for the next generation. So here's the deal. I'm going to spend the next little bit, maybe not the whole half hour here, but I'm going to walk you through a biblical pattern for how we develop others, especially how we're going to develop and equip the next generation to lead. And this is just a 3-step process. May not be what you think it is, but this is the way I read it. This is the way I do it. And so here's how we're going to do it. Number one, it just simply starts with an invitation. You know, earlier today I asked the question, why do more men not lead? And one of the responses up here was they're not encouraged to lead. I would even go so far to say they've never been invited to take on a leadership role. Do you remember when Jesus walked the earth? And we read through the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Do you remember the 2 words that Jesus used to invite people into a relationship with him? Isn't that so simple? 2 words. Follow me. Follow me. And many did. I mean, many did. And here's the thing. He invited them into a relationship in which they shared life together. They shared life together. I mentioned earlier today, and I'm going to reiterate it now. You're not going to develop a relationship by simply shaking somebody's hand at the church building on the way in and saying, "How you doing? It's great to see you," and then go to your pew. You're not going to develop a relationship with somebody that way. This idea of sharing life together is really about being transparent and open with one another. And you know, the interesting thing about Jesus, when he already knew what was in the heart of the apostles, that the relationship in which they shared life together was not so that he would get to know them. It was so that they would get to know him. That's what the relationship was about, so that they would know him. That's what leaders have to do today. Now, it's great if you get to know that person, but really the reason for this relationship is so that that person you're working with will get to know you. And you have to be transparent with them. You have to be open. You have to create a safe space. Now, does anybody remember what happened right before Jesus invited, of all those disciples, you know he picked 12. Do you remember what happened right before he invited those 12 to become apostles? Prayed all night. He prayed all night long. When's the last time? Let me ask it this way. When was the last time you heard a public prayer from the pulpit? A public prayer asking God to send men to either be developed and trained and equipped to serve as leaders, or to send men that could step into that role. When's the last time you heard it? Has anybody ever heard that publicly prayed from the pulpit? Have you? I've only heard it 7 times. 64 years old. I've only heard it 7 times in my life. The first time I heard it, I was 60. I said, I've never heard it in my life. Well, somebody that day decided I was going to hear it. The second time I heard it was when I said, I'm 60 years old, I've only heard it 1 time in my life. Somebody decided that day. The third time I heard it was, you guessed it, when I said I've only heard it 2 times in my life. And so now today, I've heard it 7 times in my life. Somebody pray. And it's usually because I've made some statement like I just made. I know the context of James chapter 4. But I find it interesting that James says, you do not have because you do not ask. Isn't that interesting? We don't have because we don't ask. I don't know why it is. I encourage congregations that not only should every individual be praying every day at home about this kind of thing, but every public prayer should be led in a way that's leading towards this idea of getting and equipping individuals to serve in this particular role. And it really just begins with as simple as an invitation. Invite them into a relationship. You're not saying, hey, I want you to be a leader. Would you be willing to accept the invitation to become a part of this congregation to serve? That's not what I'm asking. What I'm saying is you should ask people to just, I'd like to build a relationship. If you'd like to go to lunch, I'd like to just get to know you. I'd like for you to get to know me. Would we be willing to do that? You know, Jesus spent 3 to 3.5 years working on those relationships. If you knew that it would take you 3 to 3.5 years to get somebody equipped and prepared to step into the role of being a leader, would you be willing to give up your time to share life with that individual to get them ready? You see, most congregations I work with want me to come in and they want me to either give them a vision or give them a mission statement or give them some kind of strategic plan that in 6 months they're going to be out of this valley and they're going to have men equipped and prepared and ready to go. We didn't get here overnight. We're not getting out of it overnight either. This has been decades in the making. And it may take us an entire another generation before we get out of this situation. The second step in this formula or this pattern is the idea of modeling leadership for this individual or individuals. So Jesus invited them into this relationship, but then he modeled for them the type of leadership that they needed to know. And that existed right here in John 13. Now you know all the passages where Jesus said to them, the greatest among you will be your servant, the first among you will be your slave. And he talks about how he did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. You know all those passages. But John 13 is the heart, the crux of the matter when it comes to showing them what type of leadership they needed to have. Jesus gets up from the table with a towel and a basin of water, and he begins washing their feet. Has anybody in here ever done that? I mean, intentionally, from a spiritual perspective, washed someone's feet. Have you ever done that? One? I've only done it, well, a couple of you, I've only done it one time. And I'll tell you, it's the most humbling experience I know, because the situation that existed, we were in Canada. We were part of the missions team there in Prince Rupert, and every year in the summer, we took a group up to a church camp, Bible camp, up in Ketchikan, Alaska. And it was the Naha Valley Bible camp. And Naha Valley was kind of a neat place because the river that came down through there was off the Naha Glacier. Yeah, ooh, it's right. Yeah, those kids would come out blue. And so I was like, yeah, I'll not be doing that. Yeah, I'll not be getting in that water. But one year, we were contacted, and they were wanting to know how many we were going to bring up, and they told us who was coming to speak. And I just told him, I said, we're not coming. He said, why not? I said, because they had invited somebody from a denomination to come and to be the keynote speaker every night during that week. I'm like, that's not happening for us. I'm not going to try to unteach what this guy is going to teach, or to unteach what these kids are going to assume because they know where this guy's from. I'm not going to spend my time trying to unteach and reteach what you're going to destroy in a week. I said, we're just not going to come. I said, I'm not telling you to not invite him. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just telling you we're not coming. About 3 days later, he called up. He said, well, he's not coming. I said, look, I wasn't my intent. I wasn't trying to tell you not to have him. I was just telling you we weren't going to come if he was going to be there. Just that simple. He said, no, he's not coming. We want you guys here. And he said, while you're at it, you need to plan on speaking every night. I said, no, I'm sure not down for that. He said, no. He said, you're going to be our keynote. Well, one of the lessons I gave during that week was from John 13. I washed his feet. I'm not sure if the kids were aware of the situation that existed, but he was. And I really don't know that I've ever done anything that was more humbling than that. In that moment, to wash his feet. And I'm sure it was probably very humbling for him to allow me to do so. Jesus takes a towel and a basin of water, and he washes the disciples' feet, including Judas, the one he knew would betray him. And you know how it reads. He gets to Peter, and Peter's like, Lord, you wash my feet? Never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part of me. Now, Peter was smart enough to say, not just my feet, but my head and my hands. Just immerse me in it, And then Jesus, when he gets up, he says, do you know what I've done to you? I mean, it's pretty clear they didn't get it. He says, do you know what I've done? You call me Master, Lord, Teacher. And so I am. And if I then, your Master and Teacher, wash your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. I don't know if you've ever thought about this or not, but I find it very intriguing that Jesus didn't say, I've given you an example of how to preach the gospel. Go do that. He didn't say, I've given you an example of how to do many mighty miracles. Go do that. But I've given you an example of how to wash feet. Do that. I was speaking one year at Red River Family Campus, and I was actually making that statement from here to John, and I talked about that situation in Canada and how it was the most humbling experience. And then, as I was kind of going on through the lesson, I made this statement about how I know that when Jesus said, I've given you an example that you should do as I have done, that he was talking about being a servant, not necessarily literally washing feet. And somebody in the crowd said, how do you know that? And I mean, it caught me off guard. And he said, if you're telling me that it was the most humbling experience that you've had in your life, how do you know that Jesus wasn't teaching us that we should literally be involved in washing one another's feet? I said, you're right, I don't know. Maybe we should wash one another's feet. Sometimes we take Scripture and we kind of relegate things off to the minimalistic aspect of what can be done in order to fulfill what was instructed. And I'm not sure that's the right thing for us to do here. Jesus said, I've given you an example that you should do as I have done. Now, if you continue to read in that chapter, you get down verse 34 and 35, and he's going to say, a new commandment I give to you, that you have love for one another as I have loved you. And get this part. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, and that you have love for one another. Have you ever thought about the fact that the testifying mark of our discipleship, what tells the world around us that we are followers of Christ, is how we treat one another? The love that we have for one another. That's what tells the world around us. And what do you think the world sees when we can't get along? When we're dividing over things about putting a metal lid on the Lord's Supper, fruit of the vine, instead of having a cloth on it, or having pews instead of chairs. I mean, what do you think that testifies to the world when we can't get along on those stupid things? What color the carpet is. I have a 3-word response. Remember what it was? I don't care. But the world around us, what do they see when they look on Facebook and they see us ripping each other apart? I'm telling you, the world does not see that we are disciples of Christ. We're going to have to change things if we're going to show them what love looks like. Now, when you look at this idea, this model of leadership, there are a lot of different styles of leadership. You know this. There's coercion. The idea of coercion is I won't punish you if you follow me. And then there's this idea of reward. Well, if you follow me, I will reward you for following me. And then there's this idea of positional. I love this one. If you follow me, you're going to feel legitimate. You're going to have real purpose if you follow me. And then there's this idea of the expert. This one always cracks me up. You're going to end up in the right place if you follow me. Well, all of these are very transactional styles of leadership. And I'm sure in certain specific situations, they all have their place. But that's not what Jesus taught. What Jesus taught was this idea of serving. It's about seeking what's best for others. It's putting their needs above our own. It's this idea of humility and love. We exemplify it. This is transformational type leadership. So when we think about the idea of how we're going to develop and train the next generation of leaders, let me tell you, we need to start with a simple invitation, where we're inviting them into a relationship, where we're going to spend time together, we're going to share life together, we're going to get to know one another. But then we're going to model for them. This is what a leader is. This is how a leader acts. This is what they do. And we're going to model that for them by being a servant. It might mean literally washing their feet. It might mean helping them jack their car up and fix a flat tire. It might mean a lot of different things. But they're going to need to see that we're not about others serving us, but we're about serving them. Now, the third component in this model, or this pattern, if you will, is training. And obviously you know that there has to be some sort of training going on, and there are two pieces here, the first of which is instructional. Now, there are two types of instruction. There's formal and there's informal. You know, sometimes the informal instruction is probably more powerful than the formal. Now, formal instruction is just like what we're doing today. We're sitting here in the classroom and we're going through this material. And Jesus did that. I mean, you read the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to find the Sermon on the Mount. That's very formal type of training or education. You're going to find the thing about the parables. And then you just continue to read. You're going to see each of these 5 major teaching sections. And this is where Jesus is instructing them. But some of the best training takes place informally. Do you remember when Jesus and the apostles were about to go into Jerusalem, and as they're going in, Jesus sees a fig tree in leaf, and so he's hungry, and so he goes over there and finds out there's no fruit on it because it wasn't the season for figs. And so he says, "Never shall fruit ever exist on you again." He curses the fig tree, and then they go into Jerusalem. Of course, we know that the tree withered up. On the way back the next day, Peter says, "Look, Lord, the tree that you cursed withered up." You know what Jesus did? You see, it was an object lesson. Very informal, but what he's doing is he's teaching them about the significance of faith in prayer. When you believe what you ask, you'll receive. Do you believe that? Do you believe that when you pray, that God's going to answer what you're asking of Him? Do you have that kind of faith? You see, that's just a simple object lesson, just as they're walking along. I can't even tell you how many times that my children were growing up, that some of the best lessons that took place had nothing to do with sitting down, "I've got something I want to teach you," but rather it was when we were just riding along. One of my favorites was, "Can a bear run 60 miles an hour in the woods?" We didn't have Google to look it up. My response was pretty simple. I don't know. But I can tell you this, if one's chasing you, you better be able to run faster than he does. That's all the advice I got.
Run faster than me.
Yeah, or I got to run faster than you, that's right. But the thing is, more seriously, when our kids were growing up, some of the best lessons that they ever learned, that they still remember to this day, were lessons that were really taught informally, not in a classroom setting. Very few people remember the things that they learn in a classroom. It's really the stuff that they learn practically on a day-to-day basis, just informally as they're going along. Now, the second piece to this, and this one's probably, if not as much so, important or more important, and that is giving them experience. And this one's kind of challenging. You know, have you ever thought about when Jesus sent the 70 out? We call it the limited commission. I don't know where we got that term, but anyway, we use that term, the limited commission, instead of the great commission. But he sent 70 out, and he gave them authority to cast out demons and to heal and all that kind of stuff. And you remember when they came back? After that, he sent them out by twos, and they came back. They were rejoicing that even the demons were subject to them in the name of Jesus, and how that was such a powerful thing for them. And Jesus says, don't rejoice that the demons are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are recorded in heaven. Why is it that Jesus sent them out to do that? If it wasn't to give them some experience in what was coming, something far greater than this limited trip that you're going to take out here, because he tells them only go to the children of Israel, not to go in the ways of the Gentiles. This was only to the Jews. Why? They needed experience as to what was going to come that was far greater and far more broad-reaching than just the Jews. And this is the area where, as I mentioned before, I struggle. Because sometimes I don't have the patience for it. Sometimes it's just that it's quicker, it's easier. Instead of trying to teach somebody how to do it, just do it myself and let's get it done, let's move on. And it's the worst thing we can do. What we need to do is we need to take the time to help equip and train and develop them by giving them the opportunity to do that. I've encouraged congregations, I haven't had anybody take me up on it yet, but I would encourage congregations to allow their youth group to do everything from start to finish to plan, whatever youth rally or event they want to have. Let them decide who they're going to invite to speak. Let them decide who's going to lead the singing and what songs are going to be sung. Let them decide the order, the structure, the activities. Let them decide how much money it's going to cost. Let them plan the whole thing, start to finish. Now that makes us a little nervous. And my favorite question is, what if they fail? I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. It's not about what if they fail. It's what do you do when they fail that's going to make the difference. What do you do when they fail? Well, you got a couple of options here. You remember, all three of our kids, I'll never forget when they were young. Do you remember, for those of you who've had children, when they first start getting just enough strength that they can crawl over to maybe a chair or an ottoman or something of that nature, and they kind of pull themselves up? And do you remember when they first take, their knees are still kind of wobbly, the leg muscles are just not formed right, and so they'll take a step, maybe they'll take two, and then all of a sudden just poof, they just sit down. What do you think would happen if you came along and said, I knew you'd never be able to walk, worthless? You see, we laugh at that because we think that's stupid. But the thing is, what would happen? There's no need for them to ever try anything. Well, if we're not careful, we kind of do that same thing. When a young person, we give them an opportunity to take on some leadership, and if it doesn't work out right, then we take it away from them. Now, we may not say the words, but we take it away from them and we do it for them. That's the worst thing we can do. We need to encourage failure. We need to let them fail and figure out, help them, walk alongside them and say, okay, let's figure out what went wrong here and let's fix it. And let them figure out a way to fix it so that the next time they know a little better how to do that. And we just continue to build on that to the point that they're going to develop some great leadership skills. But I also wonder sometimes if we're not half afraid that they might just do it right. And what does that say for us? I'm not needed. Isn't that a scary thought?
Did a good job training them.
That's what I'd like to think. But the challenge for us is this idea of learning to give them experience. Young people don't ever learn unless they get the opportunity to do it. Well, you remember when I started off today and I told you about that Barna Research Group? They said that one of the reasons we're in a leadership crisis is because the older generation of leaders is not allowing the younger generation to actually lead. We've got to fix that. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to design some things, and here's a better solution, is really let them design some things that they are going to use. And we've got to set perimeters, we've got to set some guidelines and help provide guidance. We're not cutting them loose here and say, go out and do the wild thing you want to do, but we're trying to give them some perimeters to operate within, but let them do it. Let them design it, let them create it, let them figure out how they want to approach it, how long it's going to be, when it's going to, let them do it. And then let's be a support structure for them. We might be surprised. We might really be surprised at what happens. So see how simple that is? I mean, it's what Jesus did. He invited them into this relationship and shared life with them. Now I'll tell you, in some ways, that's going to be the hardest part for us. Because that's going to require time. We're going to have to give up some time to develop those kind of relationships, to walk alongside them and share life together. What they're doing is important, and we need to be involved in what they're doing. We need to be supportive of that. We need to go to that. Whatever it is, we need to be supportive. And then we need to model for them in that relationship what being a leader looks like. And then we need to train them. Provide the training, formally, informally, give them experience, all those things. And when you really begin to think about this model as simple as it is, it just takes a little intentionality on our part. Now, Maclay, in his book, The Multiplication Effect, would tell you to not take on more than 2 or 3 at the max, but generally 1 or 2. And I want you to seek the wisdom in that, because it's not just that you are working with 1 or 2, and that's it, but you're helping them to also take on 1 or 2, that they are emulating the very thing that you're doing with them. And his book really provides some great tools and some guidelines for which to do that. But imagine if every person in this room just took 1. Let's say between now and October of next year, that if every man in this room if you just pick 1 person, 1 other man that you want to spend time with, share life together, encourage, develop, and imagine if you were to equip him and to prepare him, and he came next year to this event in October. I thought it was funny when he said October the 24th was the day he was looking at, like today's October the 25th. So that's pretty much a year from now. But the thing is, if everybody in this room picked 1, and you brought 1 next year, you're going to have 100 people here. If everybody in this room just took 1 person, start sharing life with them, equip them, develop them, give them opportunity to see what leadership looks like, encourage them, support them, and then next year you're going to bring them to this event. How cool would that be? You'd have almost 100 people here, if not more. And if we would start doing this in our congregations, if we would start taking those individuals in our congregation and kind of bring them under the wing and start developing relationships with them, we're going to equip them, prepare them. We're going to help them be ready to lead in their home, on their jobs, in their schools, and in the church. It's not rocket science. You don't need some kind of special manual that gives you all these details of stuff to do and not to do. It's an invitation. Model for them what it needs to look like and provide some training. Formally, informally, and give them experience. And when we do that, they're going to be ready. We have right at about 4 minutes. I normally don't do this, but if you have a question, I know somebody I can deflect it to that will be an answer.
But we only got 4 minutes.
We only got 4 minutes, that's exactly right. I timed that really well. No, seriously, I'd love to. May not know the answer, probably more likely not know the answer than do. But do you have any questions in regards to the things that we've talked about today? I know we've covered a lot of material, and it's a lot to process and to think about. But if you have a question, I would love to have that. And now's the time to ask a question, because we've got so many people here that we do have folks that can provide some answers.
You've thrown up a lot of stuff on authors and books. Do you have it on a website where we can go?
I don't have it on a website, but I will promise you I'll do this. If you will shoot me an email, I'll be glad to send you the copy of my PowerPoint. And you can have those slides, and you are welcome to look up those books on there. And I will add to that the list of the Arbinger Institute books on there, so that you'll have those books as well. But I am more than happy to share the material with you. So my website, or my email address, is on the website. It's very simply bturner@sunset.bible, and that's all there is to it. But if you'll shoot me an email, I would be more than happy to share material with you.
Thoughts on managing the problem where sometimes we see people in the body that are able but not yet faithful, and we put them in leadership positions rather than the ones that are faithful and we make them able? How do we balance all that with this in regards to cultivating faithfulness first and essentially training or teaching them how to be able in some of these leadership?
Right. That's a great question. And I'm hesitant to put people who are not faithful into any kind of leadership capacity first. What I would probably suggest is start by just building a relationship with them to where they have the desire to want to be faithful, and start including them in the activities that are going on, and just continuing to walk alongside them and build that relationship. And as you begin to see them participating more and starting to engage more and be more faithful and committed to things, then I would, based on that, say, hey, I've got an idea. because you're gonna get to learn things about them that they might be passionate about, maybe even some of their strengths versus their weaknesses, and say, hey, I've noticed you got a strength in this, what do you think about plugging in over here and maybe taking this on? But I would develop the relationship first and see them progressing, and see how they progress, and if they get more involved and tend to get more excited about things, then plug them in. But I would be very hesitant that, I've seen that happen where people would say, why don't you put them on the table, that way they'll be here Sunday morning. No, that's a no for me. That doesn't work, to include them in that, just to make sure they're there. But I would start with that relationship.
Peter's prime example. I mean, he's not, I'm sure he just didn't develop his outspokenness. I'm sure that was there.
Yeah.
He just taught him along the way.
Yeah.
Voice.
Yeah, so true. Yeah.
You mentioned something before lunch, in terms of, you're talking about developing next generation leaders, talking about the men in the church, and one of the things you talked about was your raising your children, helping protect their hearts and their mind and their eyes in terms of what you allow them to watch and certain things like that. And then you made a comment, you're not binding that, you didn't say binding, but not putting that on you, each to their own. But I do think that's an important aspect of leadership to consider. It ties in with my nephew Max thoughts over there. As I'm sitting here, there are a lot of people, a lot of young men, middle-aged men within the church that are able and capable. But as men of God, in particular, those that are shepherding, those that are currently teaching, those that are leading in the church, there are a lot of people that have the potential to lead, and at the same time, we have to protect our hearts and our eyes. And I think for all the men here, one of the things that we, as we sit here before God, brother over there on the end of Rick Lincoln's name, he mentioned it when we started singing. And these words, these hymns, these songs, these spiritual songs that we sing, and we cannot, in a sense, give our lives to God and worship, and then to go back to our devices or to our movies or to the things of the day and indulge in the things of the culture. And I think for us men, as we leave here, looking at those things about integrity and character, we really need to take that with us, because we can't lead at the same time that we're indulging in sin. We can't tell the church, we can't demonstrate how much we love Jesus on a Sunday, and then Monday through Saturday going so different.
Amen. Very, very good thought. I think about the modeling aspect. That's where that really plays a part, as we have to model. In my own life, I've modeled that for my kids. Now, I'll just tell you, all three of my kids at some point kind of drifted away to do their own thing, and they got involved in some activities. Two of them especially got involved in some activities that there were some repercussions for. Our oldest son, we had to kick him out of the house 2 different times. And that was the hardest thing I think I've ever done in my life, is to say, here's your stuff, but you're not going to live like that in our home. But it's probably the best thing we ever did for him, because when he finally came around, he was like, I get it. But those are hard things to do, is to say, hey, now we weren't mean, we weren't hateful, and we weren't yelling, and we just told him, said, look, here's your stuff. You need to find your own way, because you can't live under our roof and act this way. You're not going to participate in those kinds of activities. So it took some of that, but I'm thankful now that all three of our kids are faithful Christians, and they're raising their children to be faithful, and so I'm sure they will probably experience some of those same kinds of things, challenges that they deal with. But our kids have seen that model, and so they know now as parents that there are things that they have to do. There's some decisions that they have to make that are pretty tough. But when they do, that in time their kids will learn this is not the behavior we want.
Yeah. I appreciate your example. And one last thought, I think we can't be afraid to, for those of us that are helping shepherd and teach, we cannot be afraid to ask tough questions to those that we're shepherding, in the sense of what they're partaking and what they're watching. And at the same time, our lives, to your point earlier about the elders, the people in the church, they're looking at pornography. We have to be able to stand up for that ourselves.
Yeah, and let me say this in regards to that. We can't ask those questions until we have developed that relationship. The relationship has to come first. You have to be close enough that where you ask those questions, they know that they can trust you enough that they can say whatever it is, and that you're there to help them. But if I just, I say, hey, Matt, let's go to lunch one day, and then while we're there, and 10 minutes into, I'm like, man, you struggling with pornography? That's they're like, I don't know who you are, but I'm not answering that question for you. And so there has to be a relationship. If we're 2 years deep into a relationship, spending time together, getting to know one another, when I say, man, you look a little down, are you struggling with something, or is there a challenge going on in your life? And he's comfortable enough to say, hey, man, I've been needing to talk to somebody, and I can share with you. But we sometimes jump to those those things before we develop the relationship first. The relationship is key, and that's what leadership is about. It's about relationships. It's not just about being up front and saying, hey, follow me. It's about building relationships with people. You know, I put that quote up earlier from Mac Lake. It's not a class you take. It's not a program you develop. It's an intentional relationship you build. That's developing leadership.
That's something that comes to mind throughout this whole deal that you said, is it's not a program. Why do we seem so apt to develop programs? Every time, like, anytime it's like, we need a deacon thing.
How much time do we have?
I don't know if it's like a cultural thing. if it's
Have you
like-
stopped the recording?
It's just like,
Yeah.
anything needs to be done. It's not-
We're program people. I'm just telling you, we're program people. We feel like we gotta have a program, and I don't know why. It's frustrating to me because
Even like in the church especially, like we were talking about this on the ride up, it's like sometimes we just really neglect the power of just sitting in front of a plate of food with somebody and talking. They're like, well, you gotta sign up and we'll get to you Sunday. We'll teach class for you.
Yeah.
Or we'll, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's just a mess.
See, are y'all listening? This is younger generation stuff here.
Yeah,
Are we listening? That's what I'm saying. Yeah. There it is. Rick said he would prepare for it.
Go.
But
Wait a
I
minute.
think you're exactly right. We need to do that. And it shouldn't be a program. It shouldn't be something, okay, you're going to take care of this guy over here, you're going to take care of this guy over here, you're going to take no, it doesn't need to be structured. It just needs to be you. Find somebody that you want to develop a relationship with, spend some time with them and get to know them. And see what God opens up. Be praying a lot about it. Yeah.
An observation, I really want to just, at the beginning, you made this statement about elders and shepherds. And that eldership is looked at as, you know, I'm the CEO of the church. And I despise that term.
Yeah.
And that's why. And I've noticed throughout the class, you have always talked about shepherds and shepherding. And shepherds get dirty. Shepherds get hurt. You know, and there's pain that comes with being a shepherd. There's tears, but there's also a great joy that comes with being a shepherd.
I can't recommend enough that book I mentioned earlier, The Way of the Shepherd, because he deals with all of that in that book. And it's so true. Shepherding speaks to a relationship, whereas eldering does not. And you know, the funny thing is I've not known a shepherd that would admit that they feel like their task is to be a CEO or board of directors. But it's what we do in practice. It's the practice that's being demonstrated that has created the problem. And trying to redirect their focus on not taking care of the money and not developing the budget, not dealing with all that kind of administrative thing, but instead taking care of the souls of the brethren. That's just a whole different mindset, and it's difficult to get them to see that.
Try not to put that one, but I won't do that.
I love the way you're head to hand with those scratches. It's like if he sees me, great.
So for bodies that either don't have an eldership or have a limited number of men that are serving with the eldership, and you have more qualified or not interested, or maybe have predispositions towards an eldership, what do you do in the meantime where you don't have any of that shepherding leadership? Or I guess from your perspective, what do you have in the meantime when you don't have that leadership or you have limited leadership in an eldership?
Pray a lot. I really want to open this one up to others, because a lot of you guys are coming from those kinds of congregations, I'm assuming, where you have more limited leadership. Tell me some of the things that you're doing, and I will share a thing or two here after that. Some of you that are dealing with either no elders or you're dealing with limited shepherding, what's going on in your congregations? How do you handle that? Because if you don't know, I am not a fan of men's business meetings. I don't think they're biblical. I don't think you can prove that in the Bible. And the only thing that I see in the Bible is congregational meetings, and those were basically for informing congregation, not for let's take a vote on stuff. And so we kind of, I don't know, this men's business meeting thing we've started is not biblical. And so we need to kind of steer away from those kinds of things. But what are you doing in your congregations to kind of address what he's asking?
I would say a few things. First of all, do the best you can to your understanding of the word, right? I know that's kind of a cop-out, but that's what we have to do. But like at our church, we're purposefully teaching on evangelism. We're teaching on discipleship. We have classes for elders that we're growing, trying to grow towards that goal, right? But don't just exist where you are. Have a vision of something better and be actively trying to find it.
I think one of the things you said at the beginning, and it's a statement that I've made for a long time. If you think you're a leader and you turn around, there's nobody following you, you're not a leader, you're taking a walk. And every congregation, whether they have elders or not, people are following someone. And you need to, as you're in a congregation, you look and it's like, who are the people that I see that are worth following? Because those are the ones that I want to watch. I want to, if they're like Jesus, I want to try and be like them, because my goal is to be like Jesus. So you may not have official shepherds, but there are certainly unofficial people that we tend to gravitate towards and follow. And those will be the people that you will find out turn into shepherds.
Yeah, we started as a house church, church planting. So a couple of years ago, we moved into a building that it was a house that we bought for calling fire, so we got to get started. And so now we have this good tool, and I've been working on some lessons on leadership, rules, speaking stuff, and there are everything you said, kind of fits us in our journey, and I have with us about 5 or 6 or 7 people that could address how this goes. It's a challenge to go from the place where you have dedicated everything in your life, 40 years of learning, to finally come to your church plan, now 25 years into that, and I'm 79, so I have 2 sets of stints in my heart. It's dumb for me to be in this position even at this time, but we do have people who are doing the work of elders and deacons, and I think it's a great group of people, to work on this. It subjects the congregation to tough things that they've never had to deal with before. It subjects these guys' children to scrutiny that they've never had before. And so you get all of those things in that mix, and where we do not have elders, we pray together every Sunday, and we talk about stuff that needed and that sort of thing. So we don't have elders meetings, and I know a couple of times we've had meetings with the guys just sit down for a little bit, but we don't have this. We talk about they seem to be what we do all the time. I believe exactly know next step.
Well, my first thought when you asked the question, it reminded me of a congregation that I worked with several years ago, that I had a younger gentleman came up to me and asked the question, he said, what do you do if you have a generation of guys? He was talking to those that were 40 to about 60. And he said, we've got this age bracket of these guys that won't do anything. They don't want to lead a prayer, they don't want to lead a song, they don't want to be an elder or deacon, they don't want to do anything. And as we talked about it, one of the things I shared with him is that sometimes you have to just start with the next generation. And you have to start working with them, developing them, preparing them, so when the time comes, they're ready to step into that role. And I think maybe more directly in connection to your question is that not everybody's going to. I I mean, not everybody's gonna say, yeah, I wanna do that. But you have to focus on the ones that are willing to develop the relationship, that you can start putting, some energy into them to prepare them, and equip them, and get them ready. Encourage them to step into those roles when the time is right, but not be in a hurry. I jokingly said, pray a lot, but pray a lot. Pray with them, pray for them, and really encourage them to, at some point, that it's time to make a decision. We need you to step up. And I think when people begin to realize the need that exists, and that they see that there are people who are willing to follow them, and that they understand that the role is not about being a board member, and it's not about being administrative, it's about really caring about people. One of the things we've been talking about is the title versus, the role, and we get sometimes caught up in the title aspect of it. A person, as you mentioned, can be shepherding a lot of people and never have the title, and that we need those people too. And that's true of women who are shepherding other women or children, as well as it is that men are involved in shepherding others. And so we need to encourage the role of shepherding in that relational aspect far more, and then let what flows from that be the point in which we have congregational type leadership in that regard. That's a tough situation.
Yeah, building on that, I like what you said. One of the things that I teach all the younger guys, maybe I'm younger guy, 31, so maybe I'm a younger guy.
From my perspective,
Yeah. Is that regardless of if they ever are elders or decide to be elders, the time starts now when they're a teenager to start preparing to qualify.
Exactly.
And so if they never served, they still qualified to be. And so, I like what you said, let's start with that.
Very good. Yeah, Jason.
I got a question about, you got people that are qualified to be elders and deacons? We have no biblical example of how to install. What is the best practice? Yes.
We have no biblical example of that, other than we have Titus, where Titus was instructed to appoint elders in every city. We have in Acts 14, we have the instruction, or not instruction, but we have Paul and Barnabas who went around and appointed elders in every church. And we have no apostles today. And I'm not saying that Titus is the only way that elders should be appointed. In fact, I'm not sure if that's the way to appoint elders, because it kind of depends on who that individual is as a minister or preacher before he would be in that position to do that. But to me, and this is opinion, because we don't have any biblical example of appointing. There wasn't some kind of a ceremony. There wasn't some kind of we're going to call everybody up here on the front, bring their families up here. We're going to pray for these men. We're going to, appoint them or something of that nature. Again, it comes back to how we approach the title versus the role. And I think there are some people that are doing the role without the title, and that you can almost sometimes ruin them by giving them a title. But I think we just need to ask those that are involved, that we know that are qualified to be shepherds, just ask them to be shepherds. But there's nothing in Scripture that says we need to do a ceremony, but I think there needs to be some way of letting people and acknowledging to people that these men have agreed to be shepherds in this congregation, and so we've asked them to do that. But as far as providing biblical text for this is the way it should be done, this is how it's done, not going to find it. So it's challenging. Yeah.
So talk about Timothy and Titus. Obviously, it's a little different. Paul's not running around appointing people to do that these days. But do you think that there's still, should there be? Let me think of how I want to articulate this. Should there be people doing that work, trying to get congregations to that point, or maybe not alone, but kind of like yourself going around, carrying on. Trying to get people to that point, and then the appointing process, that was kind of awkward. It was like, how did one guy just decide an entire leadership?
Yeah.
Especially when Paul was
we don't know how to do it, we just don't.
Like at some point, somebody's got, or a group of people, something has to happen, and say, hey, you know, I think Billy over here needs to.
Well, and I think that a lot of what we've been talking about ties together, but I don't, you know, it's hard when you don't have any, only example we have of anybody specifically being assigned, if you will, to a particular task was in Acts 6 with the 7 men that the apostle said, look out among yourselves, men who meet these, you know, they're this quality, and then we will put them over this task. Now, it doesn't say that they were put over anything else other than making sure that the widows were fed. People use that to say those were deacons. I disagree with that. They certainly weren't elders. But there is, I think, a principle that is there in which congregations should be involved in knowing and understanding, not necessarily voting. You know, we come from a society in which we are very democratic, and everybody feels like they have a right to vote, and that is not the correct way to do things. But I think there needs to be a way for the congregation to be involved, and that they're aware of that this is the direction, this is who we're looking at, this is what we're going to do, and for them to step into that role. But as far as the preacher being the one to appoint them, I just,
Maybe not like to hire, I don't know.
yeah.
Like, who's the we that's listening? I guess that's the question. Who is the we that's listening to the congregation and considering making these decisions?
And each congregation is going to be different. And that's the biggest challenge. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of formula of this is what every congregation needs to do. But they need to be looking for those kinds of men that have those qualities about them that we find in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1, that we look to them and that because if a congregation is not willing to follow, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter. If the congregation is willing to follow them and they exemplify these types of characteristics, then we need to be willing to say, hey, we want you to shepherd this congregation. We know that you're looking out for our souls and that you care about us, and so we want you to do that. And so, but the challenge, I think, is that we have been so long in this model of having decision makers and, you know, budget makers and, you know, administrative roles for elders, that the shepherding aspect has kind of gone wayside. Now, I am thankful that we're starting to see that shift a little bit, and there's been more of an emphasis on shepherding as opposed to being elders, but I think we're still a ways from getting where we need to be. I think a lot of the reasons why men have not stepped up to take on the role is because they don't want to be administrators. I think if we really presented the heart of the shepherd and what that looked like and that responsibility, and people actually saw that being modeled, that shepherding about the spiritual side of things, I think we'd find more men that eventually they'd be like, I can do that. And I think we should. I'm going to leave you at this thought. We're really pushing way past the 3 o'clock hour. But, this is kind of the last thought I wanted to leave with you, and I think this kind of wraps up the whole of that model that I was showing you, the pattern. More time with fewer people results in greater impact. And that is so true. You know, instead of trying to say, oh, we're going to have a class, and we want all 50 of you men to be here as part of this class, we're going to train you how to be shepherds. I think you have a greater impact by spending more time with 1 or 2 and getting them prepared and them doing that and having them doing the same. Then more time with fewer people will result in greater impact. And hopefully, long term, that's going to make a big difference. I'm going to be around here for a while. If you want to ask more questions, we can visit about that. But I think there's some other things that I want to kind of get going and finish up. But I do want to say a couple things real quick. Sorry. I want to thank Rick and Jason and Ryan just for the invitation, the opportunity to get to come and be a part of this day. I love being here, and it's been great getting to meet some of you and to just get to spend this time together. Of course, I've known Clint for several years now and really appreciate him and what they're doing at Sioux Falls. I've been there and getting to work at that congregation was great. But I also want to thank Charity and Linda, and I don't know if there are any other ladies involved, but thank you all so much for serving us and making sure the food was out and taken care of. Of course, Rick and I think Ryan and some of the others that were instrumental in making sure the meat and all the trimmings and all the stuff was here. But thank you for doing that and for making that possible. And I want to thank all of you. Thank you for taking the time to come and listening to me all day. I know from setting these that's not comfortable. And so, I can't thank you enough for your willingness to endure the day, of sitting here and going through all of this. It's just been a blessing to me. And so, if I can help you in any way, please do not hesitate to reach out, and we'll figure out a time where I can come and get to be a part of the work. Thank you.